conference, Open Research, a Vision for the Future. I'm here today together with my colleagues to talk about a short 3-step guide that we wrote on what senior academics can do to support reproducible and open research. This guide is currently available as a preprint in SciArchive, and you can find the link here. Before getting into the content of the guide, I would like to introduce you to our team. So first of all, as you may have guessed, we are all very much interested in open research. This is also why we are all part of the RIOT Science Club steering team. And the RIOT Science Club is this grassroots initiative that provides training in open research. To tell you a bit more about us, Olivia, Alexandra, Elisabet, and I are all PhD students. Olivia and Alexandra are currently studying at King's College London, while Elisabet and I are based at Erasmus MC. Olivia is interested in the pharmacological modulation of the brain correlates of ADHD. Alexandra is looking at maternal mental health and neonatal brain development. Elisabet is also looking at neurobiology in the dysregulation disorder phenotype. And I'm investigating neurobiology in anxiety and depression in childhood and adolescence. Finally, Sam, who led this work, he is a lecturer in psychology at the University of Wolverhampton and is interested in both neuromodulation as well as open research.
One of the biggest roadblocks in the adoption of open research is the current incentive structure in academia, and the fact that there's such a huge misalignment between what is good for research and what is good for researchers. For instance, we have a publish or perish culture, and that is infamous for rewarding quantity over quality of research outputs. We also have a focus on publishing novel and quote-unquote groundbreaking results. But that obviously takes resources away from research into replicability and reproducibility of past findings. And finally, we have this focus on the individuals, on the so-called superstar researchers, but that really doesn't do justice to the collaborative environment in which research is most often conducted. It's not all bad, though. There are more and more initiatives that start to drive cultural change in academia. We have bottom-up approaches, and those include practical guides and open research clubs and communities. But we now also have several top-down initiatives, such as DORA, Plan S, the TOP guidelines, and those are really the initiatives that start to reward the practice of open research. Ultimately, however, if we want open research to become the norm, it needs to be adopted by senior academics. And that is because those are really the people that are involved in every step of the research process. They design research projects, they secure funding for them, they peer review publications, do journal editing, and they also train future generations of researchers and help to guide institutional policies. Senior academics have, however, voiced specific concerns about barriers that they face in practicing open research. And some of those include things such as lack of time and awareness, resistance from colleagues, or setting higher entry criteria for early career researchers, or so-called ladder pulling. There are many publications out there that describe how you can implement open research practices in your everyday research routine. But the one that inspired us most was this paper by Dr. Florian Markovets on 5 selfish reasons to work reproducibly. So what we wanted to do is put together a similar short guide specifically for senior academics, outlining feasible steps they can take to support open research practices, but at the same time, help them improve the quality and productivity of their research. In our guide, we divide this into 3 steps. Step 1 is about changing hiring policies. Step 2 concerns properly crediting people for their contributions. And step 3 focuses on funding sources and publication outlets that support open research.
The first step that we'll discuss is change how you hire. Adhering to open research practices gives a competitive advantage for career progression. For example, publishing open access and publishing preprints are related to higher citation rates and impact. Further, pre-registration can help prevent critiquing after the results are known, or carking, and registered reports can even lead to an in-principle acceptance by which the paper will be published regardless of positive or null findings. However, since learning new practices always takes time, this may discourage people from doing so. And incorporating experience with open research practices in hiring criteria can help solve this problem, with the additional advantage that those with experience are no longer overlooked. Currently, most job applications focus on the publications and the citations of the applicant, as well as the grant funding that they've received and the teaching they are involved in. However, these criteria are not necessarily fit for our purpose, as they do not reward rigorous and reproducible research. And actually, these criteria can easily be extended by incorporating a track record of the open research practices we have shown on the previous slide. Each of these practices can then be defined as either desirable or essential for the position. And in this way, the people who have experience with open research practices are no longer overlooked, and it is also easier for them to identify those departments that would be a good fit for them. The extended criteria should then be stated clearly and publicly, both in job descriptions as well as in hiring policies. Further, it is important to realize that it is not a one-size-fits-all principle to incorporate open research practices into hiring criteria. Different job applications may require different levels of commitment, which is also dependent on the academic level of the applicant. The decisions about which open research practices to include should be made in consultation with faculties and departments to avoid disadvantaging students and staff unnecessarily. One initiative to provide examples for what a job application that includes open research practices in the criteria can look like is an ongoing project that is led by Felix Schönbrett and colleagues who have created a database of academic job offers that mention open science. And lastly, we are also collating a record of criteria that include open research practices to which you can participate. So if you are someone that has incorporated open research practices in their hiring criteria, please do complete our survey.
Step 2, change how we credit. We know that the number of papers we get published and how many times we get cited are some of the main currencies for hiring and promotion. So it's not surprising then that designating credit is associated with many fraught and difficult issues that can actually undermine the quality of our research and how effective we can work. The problem is the traditional approach to assigning credit with authorship is increasingly unfit for purpose. We have an absence of comprehensive guidelines, which means that the convention of listing authors in the order of their contribution is open to arbitrary decision making and therefore disputes. This can delay submissions and even lead to retractions, and in fact 6 to 8% of retractions are due to some sort of authorship dispute. The problem, of course, will only get worse. We're encouraged routinely now to collaborate with larger teams and with ever more institutions. And as you know, with large collaborations, it introduces issues with how to dissect who did what and when. The current authorship model also doesn't adequately deal with those that fall outside the conventional or traditional authorship criteria. Think of librarians or statisticians, for example, that might give instrumental advice but are left on the sideline because they didn't contribute to the actual writing up of the final submitted draft. This, of course, means that they get left out, but it also means that it damages future collaboration possibilities. Disputes over authorship don't just affect everyone equally, of course. The most vulnerable in the job market are the ones that are hardest hit. 40% of early career researchers report that credit for their work has been given to someone else. One way to improve the situation, though, is to lay out quite clearly who did what and when, cataloguing what roles and to what degree people contributed to. This actually describes credit, a taxonomy of 14 contributor roles that are part and parcel of every research life cycle. You may have come across credit actually, and as it is now endorsed or enforced by leading publishers, including Elsevier. So all you do is you simply list the authors that contributed to each role. As you can see here, we have roles such as conceptualization, data creation, methodology, and so on and so forth. And you can also assign to what degree they contributed to each role. Did they lead, did they do support, or did they play an equal part? There's now a handy new app, Tenzing, which can spit out a contributor roles based on the Google Sheet. And here's actually ours for our paper. In this way, credit acts like the credits at the end of a movie, transparently identifying the many and varied roles that researchers perform and also inform authorship. But there are many other advantages as well. If adopted early in a project, credit can be used to delegate tasks and manage expectations over authorship, avoiding getting speed bumps later on in the project. Knowing that one will get credit for one's work will of course boost motivation and even incentivize greater productivity. It provides an essential framework to help early career researchers negotiate and defend their stake in the authorship of a paper. And it also minimizes the risk of disputes and fallouts, the consequences of which I covered in a previous slide. And finally, it can advertise the skill set of your team and therefore increase the likelihood of attracting new collaborators and therefore be productive overall.
So lastly, senior academics are usually involved in decisions regarding publishing and funding. And for our third step, we propose changes in these areas that can support reproducible and open research. So there's been a lot of talk of culture shift in academia, especially today, with more and more open research practices becoming the norm. Funders and journals are exerting top-down pressure, and they're starting to include open research practices in their policies. So from the perspective of academics in this context, adoption of open research practices is no longer just for the greater good, but it actually gives researchers a competitive advantage. So, for example, open access and open data are now starting to be mandatory to receive funding or for publishing in certain journals. And some funders have even withdrawn funding when these conditions have not been met. Funders have also started to recognize preprints, open software, and open materials as research outputs that are taken into consideration during grant applications. And also many journals are now encouraging pre-registration, supporting register report formats, or offering open science badges to signal methodological quality. We hope that these examples can highlight the fact that it's in the best interest of senior academics to introduce open research practices into their workflow because it can benefit their careers. So in our paper, we included a useful list of resources to help you keep track of policies from journals and publishers. So for example, you have Sherpa Romeo and Sherpa Juliet, which have very comprehensive information for policies from funders and from journals respectively. So do check out the paper for more details. So because you couldn't find any comprehensive resource of funding opportunities that reward or support open research specifically, Lorenza has done some absolutely wonderful work doing data scraping from a few funders' websites. So you should be able to find these in our paper. So as you can see from these examples, there's an increasing number of funding opportunities for anything from replication studies to data reuse to helping with open access fees. And we believe that these opportunities are likely to continue to increase as widespread adoption of open research practices becomes more common. So academics who adopt open research practices will be at a competitive advantage when applying for grants. So because many of the open research policies are quite well known and have been discussed extensively elsewhere, we focused on preprints as an example. So for those who don't know, a preprint is a time-stamped, norm peer-reviewed manuscript that is made freely and publicly available via an online server like SciArchive or bioRxiv would be good examples. So preprints have been increasingly supported by funders and by journals because they increase leadership and citation, they allow information to reach the public faster, and they can now also be cited and referenced in applications for funding and in the ref, which is like a pretty big deal in the UK. So one of the main concerns of senior academics when it comes to preprints is actually scooping. But preprints are a solution to scooping because they have a timestamp and they have a DOI, and a lot of journals have actually used them to decide novelty among competing submissions. So in summary, changes in funding and changes in publishing can actually contribute to improving the current research environment and leading towards a more open and transparent way of doing research.
In conclusion, while there is no magic formula, here we proposed 3 practical steps, which we think are a way for senior researchers to promote research culture towards a more open research framework. So to recap, firstly, let's change how we hire. Secondly, how we credit. And thirdly, how we publish and fund. All these steps come with their benefits, but also with better science. Thank you for your attention. Please feel free to contact us for any questions and comments.
Right. Hi, Elisabet. Thank you. That was a wonderful talk. Thank you for helping put that together. So I'm just having a look at the Q&A section. So we've actually had a lot of resources posted in there, which is great to see. There was one question. Yes, so there's one question from Daniel who said, I've seen isolated examples of journals publisher pushing credit. Is this becoming more widespread?
Thank you for that question. I think it's a really interesting point. Indeed, there are some journals who now require you to adapt the credit taxonomy and incorporate it in your manuscript when you publish. But I think it's also something that senior researchers might want to do for themselves if it's not required by the journals, because of some of the things that Sam highlighted during the talk. And that's because it gives you a clearer idea of who is participating in the project, who has what role in the project, and who should be on the list of authors in the end. Yeah, so I think adopting credit is not only something that you should do because the journal requires it, but also something you should do because it makes your life easier.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got a very popular question that I think a lot of us can relate to. So someone asked, isn't it frustrating if PIs only get convinced to adopt open research practices if it promises to give them a competitive advantage?
That's a nice question. I have to say I'm in a very, very lucky position where I myself have a PI who is all for open science and wants to have me try new open research practices in every project that I do. So I really, really like that. But I can imagine that there's other PhD students or early career researchers with PIs who are only getting convinced when it's for the selfish reasons that we highlighted. I can see how that could feel very, very frustrating to people. Yes, absolutely. But I think this is actually a nice way. So with the 3 steps that we've proposed, you can sort of persuade your supervisor. And well, to take the credit taxonomy again as an example, I think you can easily say to your supervisor, hey, this is something that I've learned about, and I think it's something that is very useful for us and that they can adopt. And yeah, I certainly hope that they'll all get behind it.
Yeah, like that's a really good point. Like it would be, you know, an ideal scenario if people would do these things for the greater good, but unfortunately that's not yet the case. So hopefully in the future. So we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So advice I give to ECRs when working with their advisors is to show, not tell. That is, rather than try to convince them that the next paper should be pre-registered, prep a draft pre-registration and share it with them. They will see that you have thought through things and took initiative, and it makes it concrete for them. I wonder what you think of this advice from an ECR perspective.
I think that's an absolutely brilliant advice, actually. I think it's something that I partly do too. So like I said previously, I am in a super lucky position with a supervisor who encourages me to learn about new open research practices. But I think it's mutual most of the time. In a new project, I can be the one who brings up, hey, I'd like to try out this new thing, or she can be the one who brings it up. But definitely, if you show that it works and if you show what the benefits are and you have it already, then yeah, you have an easier position to persuade your PI. Definitely. Thank you for that comment.
So we have a few more questions that have come through. One of them is actually quite long, but I will read it through because I think it does speak a lot to many of the points that we've touched upon today. So first of all, thank you to the person who has shared their perspective so openly and honestly. So they said, thank you for these concrete suggestions on applying open science principles. I must admit that although I applaud the open science framework and think it's our future, I have been reluctant in fully engaging in the community. Honestly, there's even some resistance in me because open science confronts me with my flaws as a researcher. For instance, I'm afraid I still engage in many QRPs. After lectures like the one we heard today, I often feel insecure. I know there's no such thing as a perfect research, but I often feel so overwhelmed and even ashamed that I freeze up. Any advice on how to deal with this as an ECR? And how does the open science community deal with the resistance that comes up when researchers are confronted with their imperfections? I sometimes feel this resistance when I bring up issues such as p-hacking in meetings with my supervisor.
I'm really, really glad that someone brings this up because I think this is a general feeling that every one of us has. And I think it's something that Malvika also touched upon earlier today. We all have this bit of an imposter syndrome that we're scared to share our code, that we're scared to try new things, but also scared indeed to bring up issues such as p-hacking in meetings with your supervisor. I can completely relate to that, even though my supervisor endorses open research practices. And I think the most useful advice that I can give you for that is that it sometimes feels overwhelming to me too. There's a lot that you can do better, and there's always so much that you can do better and that you can feel that you're doing wrong. And what I try to do for myself is take one step at a time. Just if you start a new project, think about, hey, can I use pre-registration now? Or hey, can I implement the credit taxonomy here? Is there something new that you can do? And then I think project by project, you'll learn. You don't have to do everything all at once. And well, there's a saying in Dutch that I'm at the moment really hoping that it translates to English directly, but in Dutch we say that Rome wasn't built in one day. And that's the same with everything. It's a learning curve. So just take it easy and applaud yourself really for all the work that you're already trying to do. So the fact that you're here, the fact that you're sharing this question with us today, I think that shows that you're really moving forward. And I think that's enough.
That was a really wonderful response, and I would also add that there are do engage with other networks of ECRs, because as Elisabet said, many of us feel similar. So you will find someone that you can further discuss these things with. So we probably have time for one more question. Let me see which is one highly voted. Trying to influence practices of senior academics is one part of this, but surely we need to recognize that they are also possibly bound by institutional policies and priorities, which in turn are shaped by funders or national policies. What is the answer here to ensure engagement and understanding that academics are operating within a wider system?
That's a brilliant remark as well. I think indeed you have to take into account that your supervisor of your PI is not the big bad guy or woman who is behind everything and tries not to let you practice open research practices. And indeed, they need to navigate their own way within institutional policies. And I think it's really a combination of top-down initiatives and grassroots initiatives that need to come together to sort of make this cultural change happen. And yeah, it will take time and learning probably. So I think it's really merging the top-down and the grassroots that will, in the end, help us.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Elisabeth. That was wonderful. So stay on screen, and everyone else do wait a minute or two, just until we have all of our speakers join for the roundtable discussion. And we're also going to be joined by Sam Westwood and Nadia Soliman, who are going to help facilitate the roundtable discussion, mostly because you're probably sick of seeing my face on the screen the whole day. So for the round